It's the latest version of Is Miami Back? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Canes and the Tigers, the premier matchup in college football coming up Saturday night at Death Valley. We got Ryan Cantor on the line from TigerNet, also shaking the Southland on SB Nation. Ryan, here's a matchup that we would have to say is a big deal for Miami, a big deal for Clemson as well, but we're looking at a core group of players for the Clemson Tigers that are used to this kind of deal. They've played in college football playoff games, national championship games, big games in the ACC, concluding, of course, with the conference title game every year, where Miami, this has to be the biggest game for every player on the Miami roster.
Yeah, but I don't know that this is going to have that same feel as a colossal road game with all the lights and game day and all of that. Yes, game day's there, and yes, there's 7. It's a huge matchup, but with 19,000 fans, I don't know that the pressure gets to you in quite the same way. So yeah, I don't know that plays quite the role it does in another situation.
Miami has not been a national championship contender since 2003. They were good a couple of years after that. So since about 2015, aside from the smoke and mirrors of 2017 and a 10-0 start, Miami's been a pretty marginal football program, but they've had decent starts to a few seasons where they would enter games like this against most notably against a Florida State a number of times where they were like number 7 in the country, 5-0. And then they showed us that they weren't ready for that big stage, weren't ready for that type of team. Based on what you've seen thus far, do you think Miami's different this time?
I'm really hesitant to commit, but based on what I've seen, yes. They've looked really good. I remember in the first game of the season, I was really interested to watch. I think it was the only game on, so I was pretty zoned in. They're playing UAB, who has an okay defense, but I mean, it's UAB. Should win handily. They did, but the announcers were saying De'Ara King is not just a runner. And then he looked like he was just a runner and couldn't pass it. I was kind of thinking, yeah, this is the same deal with Miami. They're still going to be incompetent on offense. Next 2 games, he's been slinging it all over. He looks fantastic as a passer too. I love their running back, their tight end. Rhett Lashley, an offensive coordinator, seems to have found a rhythm, which is definitely different than what they had last year in their 1-year experiment with Dan Enos. So yeah, I think they're for real in so much as they're ranked 7, and I don't know that I could name, maybe 7 or 8 or 9 teams better than them, maybe. But I think they deserve the rank for what they've accomplished for sure. And they're right now, I think, playing as a top 10 team. Whether they let the press clippings get to them or injuries or something like that remains to be seen. But I think they're a true top 10 team right now.
I'll have to double check the top 25 that actually makes sense, but I believe they're number 6, a notch behind Clemson. I believe I've got these 2 teams 5 and 6. I believe is where I've got them, something in that range. The 2 moments in the last couple of weeks in which it hit me that this Miami offense is different was in one of the 2 games, either Florida State or it was probably Louisville. They couldn't get back. The television broadcast could not get back to the next play in showing the replay. This happened a number of times, and then they commented, "We can't get back," and they're just moving the ball. They're getting up to the line of scrimmage. They're running tempo. We heard that they were going to be able to execute that last year, but it never really happened. Maybe they didn't complete enough passes for it to happen. When you throw in completions, you can't do that very effectively. And the other thing was that against Louisville, there were a number of plays that Rhett Lashley called, and it wasn't just the calling of that particular play, but it was the setting up of that play with other play calls in which he duped the defense because he ran something over and over and over. Then he was able to play off of that, in which it wasn't Miami talent that made the play successful, because as long as you get a quarterback that can pitch the ball like 8 yards to a dude that's wide open because the entire defense is fooled, basically any team in the country could have scored on those plays, but they were scoring on a couple of plays because of his play calling and play setup.
Yeah, I mean they were totally wide open guys against Louisville, and Louisville's got some growing to do on defense. As I think you alluded to earlier, Miami, they're 3-0. They're certainly deserving of their rank, and I think the talent is also there. but Florida State's terrible this year. Louisville's defense isn't very good, and UAB is good for their level, but they're not a Power 5 or AAC team even. So I think a lot remains to be seen in that regard. De'Aaron King does look good though, so he'll get his first real test this Saturday.
Ryan Cantor on the line from tigernet.com and also Shaking the Southland on the SB Nation platform, Clemson football. All right. The other thing is maybe we can put Louisville and Virginia on the same line, at least at this point, based on making some type of comparison. So looking at Clemson's performance, I think this past Saturday night, some Miami fans are gaining some optimism because it wasn't quite as dominant as it should be. It was 27-17 at one point in the third quarter. Do you take anything valid away from the Clemson performance against Virginia?
Yeah, so I think that's fair, but I think you also have to caution with, coming off of a game in which you were a bit sloppy has a way of focusing the team, so it could sort of backfire. As far as issues that may linger beyond just that game, Clemson's defensive line, didn't look dominant. And I think that's a health issue. I don't think it's a systemic issue. I don't think it's a broader problem. I think it's just a health issue. And we'll see which guys are back. From what I've heard, and I don't believe this is confirmed for sure, but Tyler Davis, the defensive tackle for Clemson, should be back. And that'll be a big X factor because Cameron Harris, the running back for Miami, has been one of maybe the more overlooked players this season. He's been awesome. He already has 311 yards. He's averaging 8.2 yards per carry. That's even more than Travis Etienne this year and in any year of his career. Etienne's career high is 8.1. So, it's early, it's weak competition, but that's great. So Clemson needs to get healthy on the D line. I think that'll start to come back this week. And then there's also some busts in the secondary, particularly at safety. So that's got to get better. Seems like it was a one game issue, but we'll find out.
I wonder if you take the names off the jerseys, both the individuals' names, but more so the team names and the colors and so forth, if you could tell anything in terms of a difference athletically, that if Clemson's running into a squad that's just as athletic, just as fast, just as freakishly athletic, can jump as high, do all those athletic things as much as they can.
Yeah, I mean, Miami's recruited relatively similar to Clemson. So this should be the closest matchup they have in I'll exclude Notre Dame and say like the traditional ACC that they have this year. So I don't think it shouldn't be Clemson versus Wake Forest. When Clemson's playing Wake Forest, it's totally out of proportion. But Miami has the athletes that it shouldn't. I mean, Clemson may be a bit more athletic, especially up front, but it shouldn't be something outrageous at all. I mean, Miami's recruited great.
So back to the Miami is Miami back. So all that matters is the result on the field in terms of looking at the result of the field in terms of the standings. But in evaluating the teams, it does matter how well they play. If Miami's able to stay within what for you? What would show you that, sure, Clemson wins the game, they're still the best team in the ACC. And even if they lose the game, that doesn't mean they're not the best team in the conference. But if both teams are playing at their optimum level, what would you expect that would tell you, okay, Clemson's still the best team in the conference, but Miami, this team's good?
Yeah, that's tough to answer, and particularly coming off this Virginia game because Virginia lost by 18, and normally you'd say that's great, and Virginia deserves a lot of credit for that. But Clemson also didn't play well. They had 8 penalties. They were sloppy. So if Clemson plays poorly, yet still controls the entire game, never really in doubt, wins by 18, and they say, "Wow, we played poorly," that's a lot different than Clemson playing an A+ game and Miami sticking with them and slowly falling behind, maybe losing by 21. But Clemson was on point; they were sharp, and I don't know that Miami can beat them when they're playing that way. But if Miami can be competitive with Clemson playing, playoff kind of football, that's actually pretty impressive. And I think Miami. I don't think they're Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State level good. I don't think very many people would argue that, but I do think they're in sort of the next tier or two. They're ranked 7, and when I look at the teams below them, I don't think, oh well, Miami is inflated. 8 is North Carolina. I certainly think they're in that range. 9's Penn State. Hard to say anything because they haven't played. Oklahoma State is 10. 11 is Cincinnati. I mean, I don't know that any of the teams behind them are any better than Miami. So they're certainly a tier below Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, and maybe a tier behind the Florida, Georgia, and maybe even Notre Dame. But I think 7's about right. I think they're a legitimately good team. They just need to stay focused and disciplined, sort of not read their own press clippings like years past. And I think they can be a legitimate team that sort of the ACC was bargaining for. I don't think they have to be a national title contender to strengthen the ACC. Just be a good quality team. And then you pair that with North Carolina, and maybe Louisville starts building the program back to where it was a couple years ago, and all of a sudden the ACC is looking pretty decent.
So to extend on that point, let's take the Big Ten, for example. Ohio State's the Clemson, but then you've got Penn State, Michigan, Iowa, Minnesota, etc., Wisconsin. That tier's been missing since Florida State dropped off the cliff. Have you seen enough to make a determination as to whether that gets filled in? Of course, Notre Dame temporarily fills it in, probably. But between North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, do you think that's being filled?
Yeah, so not to say it's as good as, and we'll see what the Big Ten looks like this year. They're going to be kind of a funky conference this year, but generally they've got a great, what I would call like kind of second class. Like Ohio State's way better than everyone else, but there's some really good still other teams in that conference. Back in 2016, when Clemson won their first national championship under Coach Sweeney, the ACC was excellent. Some would argue the best, but even if it wasn't the very best, it was a great conference. That depth has been eroded, but I do think it's coming back. Quarterback play is much better this year than the past couple. And I do feel, especially with Notre Dame in the conference for this year, you sort of have that Notre Dame, North Carolina. Now we're seeing Miami. Virginia Tech kind of struggled this past week, but potentially Virginia Tech too, once they get their guys back from COVID protocol and all that. Hey, that's a pretty good second tier right there. So I think the ACC, I think we knew it would rebound with a lot of guys returning from last year. So maybe we're seeing that.
When does the prediction come out?
We can do it on the show.
Okay.
Would you like to go first, or would you like me to give a prediction here?
I have not released my predictions. I'm not prepared to make a prediction, but my predictions will be on Patreon as they are every week. We'll take note of this. I'm not bragging, but 27-17 against the spread. Just like to throw it out there while it's still intact.
So, all right. So the spread, the last I saw was 14.5. I have a lot of respect for what Miami's doing. I don't think they're a pretender or anything like that. Now, whether injuries or a loss of focus could change that later, maybe so. But right now, I do think they're a legitimate number 7 team in the country. They're coming into Death Valley, but it's not really the same Death Valley. And I'll caveat this with the weather's supposed to rain, so I don't know how that affects things. But putting that aside, assuming that doesn't change things too much and it's not nothing too crazy there, I think Clemson covers. And that's not a knock on Miami. That's me predicting that Clemson sees their we'll say not A+ game against Virginia. They get extremely focused, play an A+ game. Miami's actually pretty good and sticks around for a while, but loses by, let's say, 17-28, something like that. I think Miami is good, but I think when Clemson plays an A+ game, I think Ohio State, I think Alabama can beat them. I'm not sure if anyone else can.
There it is from Ryan Cantor. Please check out his work on tigernet.com and also Shaking the Southland on SB Nation. Ryan, we appreciate you stopping by. Enjoy the game.
Yep. Thanks for having me. Always appreciate it.